welcome to Glasnevin. We are now in what you call the Curran Square. It's called Prospect, and this section is called Curran Square, named after John Philpott Curran, the leading barrister. So basically, we're going to visit Curran's grave shortly. However, I just thought we'd keep in mind that we're going to call today Poets' Day, because in our day, although we're going to visit a couple of Ulysses' graves, we're going to pay a visit to James Clarence Mangan, my dark Rosaline. He died 1849. He was born in Fishamble Street, number 3. We're going to pay a visit to J.F. McCartney, another poet. And along the way then we're going to conclude and pay a visit to Brendan Behan. Brendan was born in 1923. He's on the 9th of February 2023, he was 100 years of age. So we're going to pay a visit to Brendan. And in that grave we're going to probably discuss Beatrice, his wife, Beatrice's grandmother. There's actually 4 poets in that grave itself, Brendan and his wife's side of the family. So we're going to conclude with Brendan Behan in recognition of his achievements, of the works that he complete, and the people that would have influenced his life. So I just thought we'd start in the Curran Square at Justice Monaghan's grave, simply because of the impressive nature of the monument. So I'm going to read you. Would you?
Yes.
Thanks. So basically, it's called History of the Dublin Cemeteries Committee, and I'm going to read you some information on Justice Monaghan.
Yes.
James Henry Monaghan, Lord Chief Justice of the Common Pleas of Ireland, died aged 74 on December 8, 1878. He was called to the bar in 1828, the year before emancipation. Elected to Parliament for Galway in 1846. He discharged the role of Solicitor and Attorney General from 1847 to 1850. A period packed with exciting state trials, notably those of Smith, O'Brien, McManus, Marr, Mitchell, Gavin Duffy and others. Some of the men he prosecuted to conviction now sleep beside him. A thoroughly learned lawyer, he showed courage and calmness through the crisis. Ordinarily he could crush without effort. As Chief Justice he showed strength and self-restraint. He would sometimes pace up and down the bench like a caged lion. And when he gave a roar, as he sometimes did, the walls of the court seemed to tremble. Let justice be done, though heaven should fall, was his motto. So, notwithstanding the apparent roughness of his nature, Monaghan possessed a heart of exquisite tenderness. Every week, the Chief Justice visited the grave of his wife, and within the little chapel, which he raised over her remains, would pour forth his soul in lamentation and prayer. So there we go. Now you have, you can see the inscription.
Is this the little chapel here?
That's the chapel.
Okay.
And if you could just follow me, just show.
Yes.
That's more or less that's the inscription there.
Oh wow.
This chapel was erected by the Right Honourable James Monaghan, Chief Justice of the Common Pleas, in memory of his beloved wife Fanny. She passed away in 1855, aged 43, and then James passed away in 1878. So it's a fabulous piece of work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Down in the Curran Square. So that's basically some information I just thought we'd highlight from this. So we're doing Poets' Day today. I'd mentioned to you James Florence McCartney. He's in the chapel circle. The original chapel was in this section, that circle there. Dennis Florence McCartney, D.F. McCartney is in that section there. Also James Clarence Mangan, you can see the name James Clarence Mangan with that Rosaline. He's that section there. You've got Brendan Behan is over here in this square section. Also in that section is Sean McEntee's daughter, Marie McEntee, fantastic poet. So there's actually 3 poets within that, in that section there. So the poets actually, it's too far to travel really. William Mooney, another poet there, died 1904 as far as you know. The Wind That Shakes the Barley, Robert Dwyer Joyce is at the top section here, and poet Leo, he wrote the Rising of the Moon. He died 1870, St. Patrick's Day. He fell off a carriage in O'Connell Street, aged 24. So he was involved in 1867 rebellion. So that's the map there. It's impossible to cover the whole section in one day really. There's about 13 poets in total in Glasnevin. Manly Hopkins is in the Jesuit plot up this way. That'd be Manly Hopkins.
Ah, okay.
He's up that section, up near Parnell, the uncrowned king. I love that one. Dora Sigerson Short, that died 1918. She's a patriotic poet. Her friends were executed in 16. She actually died from anxiety. And the poem, in fact, is called The Sad Years by Eva Garbutt. So Dora Sigerson is in the old O'Connell circle with her daddy, George Sigerson. He's a poet as well, and Hester, her mammy. So Dora Sigerson is in the old O'Connell circle, some fabulous poetry belonging to her as well. So impossible to cover everybody, but we'll just keep it local and we'll cover our three that we've identified. Are we happy with that?
Yes, very happy.
So we're in the current square. I just thought the epitaph is quite unusual. I simply called this Captain Henry Quill, Rambo Quill. If I can read you the epitaph, it might make more sense. Captain Henry Quill, late 32nd foot. He served with his corpse to the close of the Peninsular War. At the siege of Burgos, his leg was shattered, his left eye carried away by a ball. He received 2 gunshot wounds in the chest at Waterloo. One of the balls fractured the collarbone and penetrated the lung, in which it became embedded. The long train of suffering ensuing and the hemorrhage it induced ultimately proved fatal. The 26th of March 1849. There's a lovely footnote again in the Catholic Cemeteries publication here, and it says, this distinguished officer died the 26th of March 1849. The footnote in reference to the long train of suffering, the footnote says, a bit of the red cloth belonging to his uniform surrounded the bullet, and both remained undisturbed until his death 34 years later.
34 years, my God.
It's an interesting take on the long train of suffering. So there's Captain Quill.
So he's not one of the poets.
No, he's not, but we just thought we'd cover him along the way, you see, because you got to throw in all of these. Yeah. As I said before, it's a mixed bag in Glasnevin, isn't it, really? You can't just walk straight to the one person without being sidetracked. So, lovely piece of work. Rambo Quill.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So, we are still in the current square. Again, another Ulysses character called Francis Xavier Costello, a medical student. As you can see there, Dr. Francis Xavier Costello. He died in 1948. If I can read you some of the notes from Vivian.
Please.
Vivian Igo.
Yes.
A medical student. Francis Xavier, actually the quote from Ulysses, hereupon Punch Costello dinged with his fist upon the board and would sing a bawdy catch, Stabu Stabella. So Francis Xavier Costello was born in Dublin, 25 Eccles Street. He was educated at Belvedere College, Dublin, and then studied at the Catholic University School of Medicine, where he qualified as a doctor in 1901. Now, the reason why I like this is that he was well travelled at that stage. It just says Costello worked as a medical student in remote areas in the Far East. 1911 in Hong Kong. 1921 he was in Singapore, and in 1931 the Cocos Island, located in the Pacific Ocean, 340 miles off the shore of Costa Rica, where he was based until 1941. Costa returned to Ireland in 1942. He died on the 20th of August 1948. So just thought it's interesting. I know he's a Ulysses character, but a well-travelled individual, really, wasn't he?
Yeah, and he lived on Eccles Street, which is the same as Leopold Bloom, and he was educated at Belvedere, same as James Joyce.
Great connection.
Yeah.
Fabulous connection. They're all linked there, they're all connected in.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
Home from home. Glasnevin is like home from home, isn't it? All the characters.
Yeah.
So we'll have another quick look at, I want to bring it around to James Fintan Lawler, the young Islander.
Okay.
Died 1849 from County Laois. We'll have a quick visit to his grave.
All right.
And we'll have a look at his fabulous epitaph. It's succinct but powerful, and I'm going to show it to you, and I'm going to read it to you. It's fantastic.
All right, let's pop over there.
Okay.
Great.
So the grave of James Fintan Lawler, 1803, 1849, a land agitator. Basically, again, a Ulysses character. I'm going to read you some of the information from Vivian's book itself. James Fintan Lawler was born in March 1807. He was the son of Patrick Lawler, the first Catholic MP for County Laois. For health reasons, he was educated privately at home. At the age of 17, he attended St. Patrick's College, Carlow, and then he spent some time in France. In a series of controversial and stirring letters which he wrote for the nation in 1847, he advocated the land of Ireland for the people of Ireland. He also wrote for the United Irishmen and the Irish Felon, advocating a policy of land nationalisation. He was deeply interested in agrarian reform for Ireland, and his aim was to secure land rights for all. Lawler died on the 27th of December 1849 in Dublin. 25,000 people attended his funeral.
Oh, wow.
That's a fair amount, isn't it?
Yeah.
What I love is the succinct epitaph of his headstone, which says, "We owe no obedience to laws enacted by another country without our consent." Fabulous piece of work there. And again, you had the scroll. The top part of the scroll that's rolled away indicates your life of the past. The bottom part is a life awaiting the resurrection. So at a turning point in history, the dead of former generations will hear the voice of God. That will unfold and the resurrection will take place. So it's a lovely piece of work again, facing the east in expectation of the resurrection.
Yeah, and I see the two crossed quills because since he was a writer.
Very
yeah.
good, yeah. Excellent piece of stuff, isn't it, really, yeah.
Yeah, and I did want to mention too, you mentioned Vivian's book. That would be The Real People of James Joyce's Ulysses by Vivian Igoe. Fantastic resource.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody just, all you need really to think around. There's actually 150 people in that book that's in Glasnevin.
Oh, wow, okay.
You see, so it's a fantastic piece of work.
It's a huge book. I have it on my shelf at home. You could beat a man to death with that
it's
book.
a fabulous piece of work. So basically, and they're all scattered everywhere, which makes Glasnevin a unique place, isn't it, really? You're walking through time, aren't you, really? You're recalling history, and it's becoming alive to you as well. So that's Fintan Lawler. As I say, I'm gonna pass by now the oldest grave in Glasnevin as we head towards James Clarence Mangan, the poet My Dark Rosaline.
All right.
Happy with that?
I'm very happy.
Let's go, hit the road.
Having a great time.
Perfect. So this is the current square. Again, we're at the grave of got his name now, John Philpott Curran. He died in Paddington in 1817. I'll read you some notes. He lived in the Priory of Rathfarnham. Referred to, I initially heard this by Miles Dungan, he referred to him as the street angel house devil. Apparently his wife left him. I think she ran off with a priest. He wasn't that kind to his daughter Sarah, but I'll read you some information. A street angel house devil is probably as good a summary as any of Curran. As you can see, the sarcophagus there, it's quite impressive. I think it cost 800 pounds back in the day, as far as I know, so quite expensive. But it's quite a big piece of work. But as regards who and what he was, he says he behaved disgracefully to his daughter Sarah. Sarah had a love affair. Sarah was actually engaged to Robert Emmet, the revolutionary, who was hung in Mead Street, 1803. Because of a love affair with Robert Emmet, more than perilled his promotion to the bench, he refused to represent Robert Emmet during the trials. Although he defended all the United Irishmen tried in Dublin, he refused to respond to Emmet's appeal. Hence, Robert Emmet was hung in Mead Street. Apparently Sarah never. She did remarry a captain of the army. She had a child. I think she lost a child in Gibraltar where a boat was shipwrecked, as far as I know. She's buried in Cork. Apparently, one of her desires was to be buried in Rathfarnham, in the family grounds, where her sister fell out the window, and she died. But she's buried in the ground, so that's since been built. That's since been built over now. But that was Sarah's wish to be buried with her sister. He refused that. She's buried in Cork.
Oh wow!
But outside of his home and family, however, John Philpott Curran was admired, honoured, and loved. An enigmatic man, yes, but his eloquence and wit, which are part of his tremendous legal reputation. Now, apparently, he had a stutter or a stammer, and I'm told he used to stand in front of a mirror and recite Shakespeare. So that's the quality of. Now, he is recognised barrister back in the day, but unfortunately, his treatment of Sarah, his daughter, is, to use the word, abysmal. Really,
yeah.
So she's buried in Cork. I think where her auntie's down there. I'm not sure whereabouts in Cork is, but that's the state of affairs for John Philpott Curran.
Right. Can I ask you about a famous Irish or mystery from Irish history? Where do you? So I consider you an expert on graveyards. Where do you think Robert Emmet is buried?
That we don't know. I mean, some people say he could be in Bully's Acre. He could be in Glasnevin for all we know. He could be in a grave with Anne Devlin. You know, Anne Devlin was the house servant of Robert Emmet, and yes, she was more than a house servant. She was part of that conspiracy, that revolutionary in 1803. Had all the names. She spent time in Kilmainham jail. I mean, she could be in there. We don't know. She could be in Bully's Acre. He could be buried in an unmarked grave somewhere, to prevent, I suppose, the body snatchers from taking the remains as such. So no, where his remains, we'll never know. I mean, people have been researching the location, and has come up with nothing really.
They kept it pretty secret then.
Very secret.
Yeah.
Well, he gives a lovely and eloquent speech. I think that speech is in Dublin 7, Bernard Neary's book. I know for a fact that the handrail that he gave us, he was in it's a Green Street courthouse, and the handrail that he gave the eloquent speech about don't inscribe my epitaph on my grave until Ireland is free, words to that effect. But apparently it's a fantastic piece of work. He's how would I phrase it? A speech at the dock. But the handrail apparently that he had his hands on, I think it's in. I'm not sure what it's in Green Street, but Dublin 7 makes reference to it of that speech itself. You see, so that's Fintan. That's Curran.
Yeah.
We'll take a walk over now. We're going to take a walk over to what we call the Chapel Circle in Glasnevin, and over there we're going to come across Timothy O'Brien, the Ulysses character, the night at the Battered Naggin. We're going to visit the oldest headstone. We're going to visit the oldest grave on the way, the oldest headstone, and then J.F. McCartney, the poet.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Let's go. So here we go. The oldest grave in Glasnevin, the 22nd of February 1832, again in the current square. Michael Carey from Francis Street. So it's not the oldest headstone. The oldest headstone is Patrick Campbell. We'll have a look at that on the way, 29th of February 1832. But the oldest grave, the first person in Glasnevin when it was 9 acres of land initially. So there's your gate into the cemetery there, the oldest section of the cemetery. And just to mention there that I did come across a fact about the Phoenix Park, that near the Ordnance Survey, the oldest grave, not only in Dublin, not only in Ireland, but one of the oldest graves in the world is in the Phoenix Park. It's over 4,000 years old.
Oh, wow.
I believe it's older than the pyramids. It's interesting, isn't it?
Amazing,
in the Phoenix
yeah.
Park. It's not well documented, but I did come across a small little publication in the Phoenix Park in the visitor centre there, and it just said that there's a little stone in the cemetery or in the park. That's a grave 4,000 years old. I did come across another feature, another fact, whether it's true or not, but the longest graveyard in the world. The longest apparently was the Great Wall of China.
Oh.
Apparently,
okay.
people along the way, you know,
Yeah. They
you could die from
during the
exhaustion,
Okay.
disease. I
Okay.
don't know what other causes of death, but
Like
apparently.
the Hoover Dam, where like there's some workers who, this might not be true. This might be a legend, but that some of the men who worked on the Hoover Dam like fell into it as they were working it,
yeah.
and they're still in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting facts, isn't it? Really, you know. So there we go. That's the oldest grave, not the oldest headstone. I think that might have went up in 1843. His mammy passed away
Right.
in 1843, and the headstone then was erected, and that was probably put on there later on there just to mark, just for people to find that the oldest.
It's very good condition compared
Yeah.
to some that we've seen.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece of work, isn't it?
Yes.
So we're going to leave the current square now, and we're going to pay a visit to the Chapel Circle. So I did explain that the headstones, there's 300,000, they face the east in expectation of the resurrection. However,
Right.
the clergy, the Reverend Kelly, you can see the cap there on top. So the Reverend Kelly, they face the opposite direction. They face the flock, more or less. So the book, dead interesting, Glasnevin says that they minister to the flock. That's why they face the flock. It's interesting, isn't it? So they face the opposite direction. So it's another little small subtle feature in Glasnevin. I just want to show you if you can see the table tomb in the distance.
Yes.
That table tomb. That table tomb, next to the table tomb is the unmarked grave of Joseph Haverty. He painted the Blind Piper. That's on display in the National Gallery. He died 1864 from Galway, and again it's one of those unmarked graves.
It's incredible that someone like that would be in an unmarked grave.
Yeah, it's in the National Gallery, so it's quite. It's a fabulous painting actually. If you did see it, you see.
Yeah.
It's a fabulous piece of work, and so it's an unmarked grave. There's no that little character really, isn't that? That's unidentified, not recognised as such in the things. So we'll have a look at that. That's another feature there, isn't it? Really.
Right. Thank you, Martin.
All right. So we're still in the Chapel Circle of Glasnevin, and this here I brought you the oldest grave. This is the oldest headstone.
Yes.
The 300,000 headstones. This is the first. Uno. And simply, it's not rocket science. It's Patrick Campbell. He died on the 29th of February 1832, and it simply says the first stone erected in this cemetery.
All right.
Patrick Campbell. So there's another bit of history in the making.
All right.
So this was the field at one stage, and this was the solitary headstone.
Oh my goodness.
It's quite impressive.
Do we know who Patrick Campbell was?
I have no idea. However, it does say he died in 1830. So where he was between, he died, it says, on the 4th day of November 1830, in the 66th year of his age. Now he came to Glasnevin on the 29th of February. So where he was for 2 years, I don't really know.
Yeah, the remains were removed here on the 29th of February 1832. So.
Yeah. So he was actually Campbell, Patrick Campbell of Campbell Place, Mount Joyce Square.
Okay.
So basically, that's it.
All right. So they dug him up and moved him over here.
I don't know.
Okay.
All I know is he died in 1830,
Right.
and he came here on the 29th.
Gotcha. All
You
right.
see, was he in storage? We couldn't tell you.
Okay.
You know.
All right.
So they call this the departure lounge. So he's in the departure lounge.
Yep. Waiting
So
for the resurrection.
that's it now.
All right.
Happy with that, Mr. Campbell?
He's oddly silent on the issue.
Yes. Okay. So we are at the grave of Timothy O'Brien. Now what's intriguing is that Ulysses calls him Timothy of the Battered Naggin. Again, Vivian and I spoke to real people. I'll read out who Timothy O'Brien was. The Lord Mayor of Dublin, a successful merchant and eventually governor of the Hibernian Bank. He purchased a house at 1 Patrick Street, which he converted into an inn. As an innkeeper, O'Brien was known for his short measures. He used a battered naggin for this and was nicknamed the Knight of the Battered Naggin. He was a member of the repeal movement. He was one of Daniel O'Connell's foremost lieutenants. He served as Lord Mayor of Dublin in 1844 and again in 1849. In 1846 he was elected Liberal MP for the Royal City of Cashel. As Lord Mayor, O'Brien received Queen Victoria on her first visit to Ireland in August 1849. In return was created first Baronet of Borris in Ossory. He died December 1862. So there's Mr. O'Brien, the Knight of the Battered Naggin.
Mr. Battered Naggin. Yeah.
So if you, it's like me selling you a can of Coke, and if I squeeze the can, I've reduced the volume, but
Right.
charge you the full amount.
Yeah.
Clever move, isn't it?
Yeah. So he's an honest man, is what
A
you're
very
saying.
honest publican. So the Knight of the Battered Naggin,
Right.
you know,
Excellent.
interesting piece of work, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Nice way to make a few quid on the side.
All right.
So it's a nice piece of work, isn't it? It's quite outstanding, isn't
It's
it, really?
very impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, you can walk, when you walk in the gate actually on the Fingers Road,
Yes.
you can see that from the distance.
Oh wow.
It's probably the second, I reckon it's the second, after the Round Tower of Daniel O'Connell, probably the second tallest monument
Interesting.
in the cemetery.
Yeah, it definitely would.
Yeah, so
be
that
in the
wasn't
running.
cheap.
Right. So you can buy a nice fancy monument with your.
The Knight of the Battered Naggin.
Yeah.
There's a nickname to have. Who'd love you for that name?
Okay.
You know. Okay.
Great.
So we're at the grave of D.F. McCartney, Dennis Florence McCartney. Again, quite obscure, and it just simply says Dennis Florence McCartney, the member of the Spanish and Irish Royal Academy. So there's some information from Corinion. It's called Corinion Dublin by Jimmy Wren. If I can read you an extract from that
I'd love to
about
hear an
the success
extract.
of the poet himself. Dennis Florence McCartney, the young Ireland poet, lived for some time at 53 Upper Gardiner Street. He was appointed to the chair of English literature at the Catholic University in 1854 under papal authority. He contributed to the Nation and the University magazine and received a medal from the Spanish Academy for his translations from the works of the Spanish dramatist Calderon. McCartney lived on the continent for some years. When his more centenary ode was read in 1879, he was crowned as the Poet Laureate of Ireland. Dennis Florence McCartney returned to Ireland and spent his last few months at Harbour Terrace, where he died on the 7th of April 1882. So there's another renowned poet, isn't it, really? It's
Right.
interesting. Kind of in a very obscure place.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that well
Yeah.
visited because you've got to come in deep to
Right.
pay a visit, you see. So I'm going to introduce you to the grave of Dr. Kirwan. This was introduced to me, believe it or not, by Bernard Neary. He's the author of Dublin 7. I met him here and he says, that's Dr. Kirwan, Kirwan Street off Monastery.
Okay.
I actually came across the next some information on the history of Dublin Catholic cemeteries, and it's to do with body snatching.
Okay.
the grave robbing, and the Cuban bloodhounds that would roam the graveyard at night.
Right.
They would stain the bodies for £2 for an adult, 6 shillings per inch for a child. I did read that for 300 bodies at one stage you could get £1,400. So such was the lucrative business.
6 shillings per inch is a very grim detail.
Big money.
Yeah.
So basically, and apparently you put them you can put them in a barrel and put butter on it and send it off to Edinburgh for a fiver. So, and I did mention that a good set of teeth as well in 1870. You get a few quid for that. However, Dr. Kirwan, that was brought to my attention. He was the doctor that would pay a visit to the sexton at night for a medical check of the staff at night. But I will read you this stuff.
Okay.
I'll read you this from this is a nice piece of work. I didn't mention the author's name actually. It's William J. Fitzpatrick, and it was posthumously completed by his son. However, I'll read it to you.
All right.
In 1853, the bloodhounds which had so long guarded the Glasnevin cemetery bayed no more. How the Glasnevin committee, came to relinquish the services of those vigilant and faithful creatures arose in this way. As an annual stipend had been paid to the physician to attend in cases of illness the cemetery staff, Dr. Kirwan, the well-known city coroner, was the last to fill this post. One night, when hurrying through the cemetery to visit Mr. Walker the sexton, Dr. Kirwan was suddenly attacked by the bloodhounds. Their mission from the first had been one of hostility to such medical men as dared to invade the cemetery at night. Dr. Kirwan, placing his back against a tombstone, sought to keep the bloodhounds at bay, and for some minutes the city coroner was in imminent risk of furnishing in his own person a sensational case for inquest on the morrow. At last his lusty cries for help were heard among the canine chorus. Help arrived, and thus Dr. Kirwan narrowly escaped. The nocturnal incident naturally caused a shock. As a result, the bloodhounds were banished. So
wow.
Thanks to Mr. Kirwan, he wasn't actually injured, but they did pin him to the back of a headstone. And the footnote says Dr. Kirwan was attacked near the old chapel circle, that's where we're standing at the moment, and close to the spot where his own tomb now stands. It records that his death took place the 3rd of February 1868, and there you go. 1868, right. So that's Dr. Kirwan.
Okay. So he was not on the take or anything. He wasn't
in
the body rack.
Paying a visit to to give a medical inspection to the staff.
Gotcha.
In the lodge at the main gate over there.
Right,
and the dog says, "Here's a medical." Are they up to body snatching once again? So they sent the GP, and off they went after Dr. Kirwan.
Okay. I thought this was going to be some story of how like the coroner was in on the body
on
snatching.
The take. No, you wouldn't know. No,
Okay.
it doesn't say that. So however,
Right.
but
So he was innocent.
he was doing
Right.
his job. But at least the bloodhounds were doing their job.
They were too.
They were alert, you see.
Did exactly
So-
what
so
they were
that's
trained to do.
doing the job. So there's and cleverly enough to stand behind the headstone. They couldn't get him from behind. You know, and it says then that his voice, the chorus of the dogs, he screams, brought the attention of the sexton in the lodge,
Okay.
and hence they had to banish the dogs at that stage.
My
Dr. Kirwan.
goodness.
So we're now at the grave of James Clarence Mangan, my dark rose Elaine. He died on the 24th of June 1849, aged 46. Ireland's national poet. This was, I think, the National Graves Association would have restored that at one stage. I kind of like his work, like some of his poetry. Although he had a harrowing childhood, he lived at number 3 Fishamble Street. It's at the top of Fishamble Street. It's now Castle Street, the Castle Inn. I think number 3, number 5 Fishamble Street is where he lived. Now the family had a grocery store at number 3, and I think it just went. They lost the business. He did go to school. I'll just read you some notes there. Mangan. He was born in 1803, baptised in Rosemary Lane in the Liberties. He attended a Jesuit school. His first poem appeared in 1818. He worked as a legal copyist. I think George Petrie would have met Mangan and gave him a job up in the Ordnance Survey. I think he worked for 6 years in the survey. Then he got a job in Trinity College Library. Spent some time in the library. Mitchell would have seen him in the library climbing ladders, and would have described him. It would have described him as being somebody that's kind of unkept. His hair blanched, it says. His skin was sallow. His clothes were wearing the same clothes as from one end of the week and one end of the year to the other. Yes, he had a cape as well and a big book under his arm. And I think all this stuff was in that book. How never. So 1829, 1838, he contributed poems to the Dublin Penny Journal and Dublin University magazine. Again, he's employed as a copyist in the Ordnance Survey. Unlike his poem was called "The Woman of Three Cows." He was dismissed from the library. I think alcoholism, the drink, got the better part of him. He's a very complex individual. He suffered from depression as well. And his living conditions weren't great. I think that at one stage he went to the Meath Hospital and they put him in bed beside another patient and that had an infection. I think he became a hypochondriacal, to use the phrase there. So just in 1849, cholera, picked up cholera, he had fever and malnutrition. And only 3 people, now we spoke about Fintan Lawler, 25,000 people came to his grave. 3 people came to the grave of James Clarence Mangan, my dad Rosaline. But on a lighter note, he was admired by Yeats, he was admired by James Joyce. So he is recognised as a poet, again, the national poet. Brendan Behan sang My Dark Rosaline when he was in the Curragh camp in 1945, commemorating the 1916 rebellion. So even James Joyce gave him some recognition, isn't it? Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, some of Joyce's very early work, he wrote a lot of like critical pieces, and he wrote about the poetry of Mangan. And there's a theory, so the 6th episode in Ulysses is the Glasnevin episode, and Paddy Dignam, the character who has died in that, there are 13 people present at his graveside, and 12 of them are accounted for, but there's this mysterious 13th figure. You never learn who he is in the book. He's just the man in the Macintosh. So, of course, over the last 100 years, there are lots of theories about who that is, and Joyce never said, so we'll be speculating forever. But there is a lesser known theory that it's meant to be like the spirit of Mangan, because he was known for looking a bit odd and wearing a big large overcoat. So those are
could have been Mangan.
Could have been Mangan, yeah.
Fabulous poet, isn't it? That's interesting to take on the Joyce take on that as well, isn't it?
Yeah. No, his work definitely influenced Joyce.
I know Brendan Behan was also familiar with his work as well.
Yeah.
My Dark Rosaline.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we go visit Brendan?
Let's go.
All right.
Well done. So we're at Brendan Behan. Brendan Behan was born in 1923, and the 9th of February 2023 he will be 100 years. So a couple of weeks ago I didn't know much about Brendan Behan. I knew 2 phrases that he used. One was that if he had to live his life over again, he'd live over a pub. And the second was he was in Canada, he seen the sign, drink Canada Dry, he said, I did. But apart from that, the extent of my knowledge of Behan was 0. I got a book 2 to 3 weeks ago, and it's called 2 books actually. One was mentioned to me by Connie Sneyd, actually a friend of mine, a musician, mentioned Brendan Behan, The Life by Michael O'Sullivan. He mentioned that some time ago. I had it in my library. Got a book there a few weeks ago called Reading Brendan Behan. I think it's called John McCourt. So I put those 2 books together in preparation for Brendan Behan, and extracted information that I thought was interesting. So I could just read you some of the stuff that I got from those books, if you like.
Go for it.
So basically, again, reading Brendan Behan discussed the sum that makes up the man, the sum of all his parts. And I'm going to read you the breakdown of the character of Brendan Behan. We all equate Brendan Behan with drink, an alcoholic, a raging alcoholic. He was more than that. As a matter of fact, the book says he was a genius. But I'll read you some of the lovely qualities that he had, and again some of his imperfections. It says he was a rebel soldier, a house painter, a novelist, a jailbird, a boozer, a short story writer, a chancer, a drinker with a writer's problem, an international celebrity. He was unpredictable, a showman, a world famous playwright, a singer, a poet in the Irish language. He wrote 13 poems. A Dubliner, a gifted scholar, and it just says a genius. But before I move on, I really want to just say that Beatrice, his wife, is here as well. Beatrice was also a poet.
Oh, okay.
From middle class, and also Beatrice's grandmother was a poet, blonde at Saltkeat, and Beatrice and her son Celtic French Saltkeat. They were, so there's actually 4 poets in that grave, including Brendan Behan. So it just says, again, as a poet in the Irish language, a playwright, novelist, and a short story writer, it could be said that at one level, all these roles caused him no anxiety. He excelled in all of these. So it just came natural to him, didn't it? The storyteller and the poet. His small but important contribution to modern poetry in Irish has been acknowledged in authoritative publications, including the Field Day and Anthology of Irish Writing 1991 and the Cambridge History of Irish Literature 2006. Behan did say that music and song played a part in his family life. His mammy would have sung songs to deal with every situation in life. It says in all his writings the use of song was a natural and almost unconscious act. Communicating through music was a vital technique, the extension of a family tradition. In Confessions of an Irish Rebel, Brendan Behan explains, I'm a very good singer, he says, or at least I was, until my larynx gave in to too much gargle. So there we go. That's the music in the family as well, isn't it? Now I will mention his works that we're all familiar with. I'll admit I haven't read them, but that's another day's work. He was incarcerated in the Boston, wasn't he, at age 16, and he also got 14 years sentence for the attempted murder of a policeman, detective in Glasnevin. So the 3 years in Walton Jail and Halsley Bay in the detention centre. But his works, getting back to his works, 13 poems, The Confirmation Suit, Richard's Cork Leg, The Borstal Boy, The Hostage, and The Queer Fellow, which created international awareness. So he also Behan's most famous lament and most anthologised Irish poem. It's in Irish, but in English it's called Jacqueline Laments the Blaskets. Now I'm aware that Brendan Behan would have loved the Blasket Islands, Ballyferriter and Dunquin, those parts of Kerry that he loved. And also the Laughing Boy. Now I'm told the Laughing Boy was an expression that his mammy, Kathleen, would refer to Michael. Kathleen was great friends of Michael Collins, as was Stephen, Brendan's daddy. Apparently when Stephen was incarcerated during the Civil War, Michael Collins gave his mammy a fiver. But Kathleen Behan always called Michael Collins the Laughing Boy. Now apparently Brendan wrote the Laughing Boy. So as a child, basically, looking at Brendan Behan, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Consider this, his daddy, Brendan was born in 1923, the height of the Civil War. At the time Brendan was born, his mammy Kathleen brought him down to the prison and said, there's your son Brendan. Now Stephen was the father. His uncle Paddy Carney wrote the national anthem.
Oh, wow.
His uncle is actually buried in the Republican plot. He's buried with Thomas Ashe, Ireland's first hunger striker, 1918. So the house painter, Paddy Carney, is buried there. He's one of the Abbey rebels as well, the managing director. He worked in the Abbey as far as I know. The mammy, when Stephen was incarcerated, I think Collins found work for Kathleen with Maud Gonne. She worked in the house with Maud Gonne. So it's a good connection there, isn't it, really? And I mentioned Paddy Carney, the national anthem. It was adopted by the state in 1926. I think the state paid £900 for that piece of work as well, didn't they? Again, he was the poet as well. Paddy Carney, not only a house painter, and also would have taught Irish classes in the evening. Now, Brendan's youth, again, was steeped, as it says, it was steeped in the drama of 1916, surrounded as he was in youth by men and women who never ceased to speak and sing of the 1916 rebellion. At age 14, in fact, his brother Dominic said that Brendan had this desire to go to fight in the Spanish Civil War in 1936, 1937. Now, Brendan was only a child then. No doubt to fight with the same battle that Tommy Woods, age 14, Tommy Woods was from Cabra West. Tommy Woods from Swilly Road, I believe. He fought in Cordoba and died in Cordoba. His mammy's in Glasnevin, and his uncles that would have been his uncle is one of the Forgotten 10 that's buried up next to Roger Casement. So at 16, then Brendan, I believe, took it upon himself to blow up Liverpool docks. Now he was a Fianna, in the Fianna era, the Boy Scout runner for the Republican movement. But at 16, he was a volunteer of the Republic of the IRA. And he went to blow up Liverpool docks, but he was arrested and got 3 years, as I mentioned, in Halsley Bay and Walton Jail in the detention centre there. And so that's his experience in the Borstal setting there. So basically, the piece that I got from that I appreciate in the book, reading Brendan Behan, it's called The Three Nuns. And the three learned the lesson of the three nuns in detention centre. The governor came up and it's to do with tobacco. And the governor said to him, there's three nuns, three lessons you have to learn. One is regarding tobacco. There'll be none yesterday, there'll be none today, and there'll be none tomorrow. So that's your take on the three nuns and the tobacco. So that's a bit of sense of humour. So he spent, having been convicted of 14 years for the attempted murder of a detective at Glasnevin, at the commemoration, 1916 commemoration. He spent his time he got 4 years, during the amnesty got out after 4 years, but during that time he spent his time in Mountjoy, Arbour Hill and the Curran military camp. That's where he learned his Irish poetry. So the Mountjoy, Arbour Hill and the Curran camp, he engaged in the study of the Irish language, taking lessons from Sean O'Brien, an Irish language scholar. And it does mention another individual called Martin Cadine, O'Cadine, I can't pronounce that. So that's where that was in 19.
Martin O'Kine, I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
he wrote a very. He's considered like the James Joyce of the Irish language.
Interesting.
You would love his novel. The Irish name is Crain Achillia, and there's different translations of it. But the idea is that all the characters in it are corpses in their graves talking to one another, waiting for new people to come in and get buried so they can get some new gossip.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, you gotta learn Irish to read it.
Okay.
They translated it, so.
Right, that's over my.
You
Well, we
should
got the. I
definitely
remember doing
Yeah.
Peg Sayers for the Leaving Cert, and I had to do it in English. So I didn't get the grasp of the Irish.
You can read Martine in English.
In English,
so.
that's we have a look at that. So it just said then that he went to Paris. He spent I think 20 odd years in Paris, and it just used the expression for personal freedom, literary emancipation, and the psychological space to complete the Borstal Boy and the Queer Fellow. And also in Paris, it says over almost 2 decades from 1948 until his death in 1964, Behan enjoyed several sojourns of varying lengths in the French capital, where he met a host of friends. One in particular was Samuel Beckett. So that's another interesting take. Paris was the city in which Behan wrote much of the Borstal Boy and probably the best part of the Queer Fellow. Behan alongside Beckett, both writers shared a sense of exile in Paris, and both had suffered from rejection of their work in Ireland. So the Borstal Boy, I love the phrase and the connection with James Joyce, Ulysses. He says, some people may say that my book, The Borstal Boy, shouldn't be read. Then I say that adolescence shouldn't be lived. Here Behan echoes Joyce's words, if Ulysses isn't fit to read, life isn't fit to live.
That's right.
Both writers ultimately were united in their desire to express in fiction everything that life threw their way. So he was influenced by T.S. Eliot. His grandmother-in-law, and was the modernist poet Bláthnaid Solkit, who, like Behan, came under the influence of T.S. Eliot. Bláthnaid is actually here. You see Bláthnaid. She died in 1958. Her works, she was a poet as well, prose and poet. Her works include Hello Eternity, A Dubliner, and The Fox's Covert. So now, most important, I suppose, really that what makes Brendan Behan. I love the piece where in the book itself, reading Brendan Behan is and also Brendan Behan alive, is Beatrice, his wife. That you have to mention Beatrice in Brendan Behan. She was from middle class. Beatrice was a botanical assistant in the Museum of Natural History. Extremely beautiful, fine features, delicate pale skin, set off by her thick dark hair. Beatrice, she knew Brendan to be a hard drinker, but she was captivated by his voice and personality, who promised her diamonds, mink and a house. So any dreams she said I had of Brendan were vanishing in the smoke of the Dublin pub. He wrote a poem to her really, and the two verses, I'll read them out to you. He had a love for Beatrice really. When the timid eyes looks at you, fearful and full of guilt, in hope its woeful look will catch you smile across the quilt. Oh, what hopes of reformation, promises to stick the stout, beating breasts in condemnation of late stopping out. So that's a couple of words there that he wrote. I do want to mention, I do want to mention that before Beatrice ever met Brendan, she actually fell in love, and a guy, Ian Stewart from Wicklow, proposed to her. Ian Stewart is the son of Francis Stewart, the novelist in County Wicklow.
Okay.
Francis Stewart married Iseult Maud Gunn MacBride's daughter.
Oh wow.
Buried in Glendalough, in the Round Tower. That's where Iseult is buried.
Oh, okay.
I just thought that's a lovely connection between Maud Gon McBride and Beatrice. So before Brendan came on the scene, she was a looker, and that's hence Ian Stewart did propose to her. Beatrice met Brendan in 1954 when they went to see the Queer Fellow in the Pike Theatre. That's where the relationship kicked off. In 1955 they married, and the honeymoon was in Paris, and I'm afraid to say they were penniless in Paris. That's what people had to actually send money across to them, you see. So basically, I'm just coming to a conclusion of Brendan Behan. 1964, his funeral was famously one of the largest and most heartfelt that Dublin had ever seen. The city streets were lined with mourners as thousands of people and paid their respects to a fellow Dubliner who had died far too young. His life was cut tragically short at age 42. So Brendan is well remembered for the works that he done, and I love the piece of work also remembered for switching on the Christmas lights in Parnell Street in 1958. So just to conclude, if I can read you a little extract from Ray Baston's book called The End, and just as regards the headstone itself and the monument there, it just says his death was reported worldwide. His funeral mass was attended to by the Lord Mayor, representatives of the President, the government and the church, as well as the plain people of Dublin. The IRA acted as pallbearers after the mass and the last post and reveille was sounded. Later after the mourners had gone, the IRA fired a salute over the grave. Brendan's grave remained unmarked for 15 years. An article in the Sunday Press drew attention to that state of affairs, and the Dublin branch of Conrad na Gaeilge decided to erect a monument over the grave as part of the Seachtain na Gaeilge. The sculptor Cleana Cossain created the memorial. So just that piece of work that's called The End by Ray Baston in conclusion of Brendan Behan. So really, it's a lovely take. I just think to remember Brendan Behan 100 years later. To my regret, I didn't know anything about him up to a couple of weeks ago. I'm happy that, you know, but how do you think about the take on Brendan Behan yourself?
I think you've done a very, very good job. You know, you've done well by him. I've never read any of Brendan Behan's works, to be honest. I have to confess the same thing as you, that I'm not super familiar with his work, just his reputation. So definitely in this the centenary of his birth, we both need to rectify that.
Do a bit of work. And I really love, just to conclude, I love the phrase that it says that he was a scholar and a genius.
Yeah.
Not just a drinker, an alcoholic or a raving. He was there was a depth of him, there was a
like
literary depth there.
He was a drinker with a writing problem.
Yeah, that's a good one, really. So we all coin simple phrases, but there's more to the man that really isn't really. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brendan Behan, well recognised.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.